They say there are lots of personalities and characters in Pinehurst, and there certainly are. There are hundreds of them, but we have somebody on the podcast now that knows where all the bodies are buried. Cricket Gentry, she's next on Paradise in the Pines. Okay. Welcome to Paradise in the Pines, a podcast about the people, places, and stories that make this the home of American golf. Brought to you by the Pinehurst, Southern Pines, Aberdeen Area Convention and Visitors Bureau. And thanks for joining us again on Paradise in the Pines. On this episode, you know what? I got to tell you, our guest is Cricket Gentry, and appreciate you joining us. I was told by not just Matt Hauser, the GM of Talamore, who's on our board with the Convention Visitors Bureau, but I've been told by numerous people that you need to have Cricket Gentry on your show. Who is Cricket Gentry?
Well, Cricket Gentry, for one, is very appreciative of you bringing me on my show. And I'm so glad the check cleared to Matt and all these other people that got me on here. Cricket Gentry. I don't know. I'm not much of anybody. I'm a good horseback rider and a bad golfer and a paramedic, and I've been here since 1972, so I do know where some of the bodies are buried. And unfortunately, enough of them have not sent me checks, so I may have to tell a little bit about them.
Well, we look forward to diving into some of these stories, Cricket.
Excellent.
I think most famously, you're the daughter of John Derr. It's funny because I went to James Madison University with a gentleman named Kevin Derr. I don't think they were related. He definitely was not from New Jersey. He was from Virginia. But talk about your father. I mean, he just doing some background on him. I mean, covering I'm wearing the Masters sweater today. He covered 62 of 66 Masters tournaments. Spectacular. And just talk about your dad, his legacy. And I know he's been obviously plenty of stories to talk about him, but let's get started talking about your dad and obviously he meant a lot to you.
He certainly did. And it's interesting you said your friend was from Virginia. Dad was not far from that. Dad was actually born in Dallas, North Carolina, which is a little town outside of Charlotte.
In Gaston County.
In Gaston County, correct. And had a very humble beginning. His dad was a rural mail carrier. He lost his parents very early. He lost his mom when he was about 14 and lost his dad when he was about 25. But Dad went through high school, and he went from K through 12 with a young man by the name of Bill Friday, who, if you are familiar with, he was the chancellor of the UNC schools for decades. And he and Bill went to school together from K through 12. At any rate, Dad evidently had some form of an injury early in his athletic life, whatever, and injured his knee, so he could not play in a lot of the sports, but yet he wanted to be involved. So he started out being the scorekeeper for a lot of these things, for baseball and for the golf. Well, not necessarily golf at that time, but baseball. So he would go to a lot of the high school athletic events, and so that's kind of got his foot in the door with athletics, but also with the media. And so it kind of went from being a scorekeeper to then writing stories about the teams and one thing and another. And then he ultimately, my father never went to college, but he ended up going to a school. And right now, of course, because that's what happens, I totally forget the name of the school. It's a Catholic school out there, Belmont Abbey.
Yeah.
Belmont Abbey.
Yeah, just suburban Charlotte. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. He went there and spoke with the father, I guess the priest, the head of Belmont Abbey. I believe it's a Catholic school, if I'm not mistaken. And he said, hey, I would love to have education in the English language so that I can write better and speak better. And in exchange for that, I will do stories on your athletics. And that's how my dad's career in the media started. And then he ultimately went on up through several different sporting things. Like he was sports editor of the Greensboro Daily News, and he went to the war, and then he was with CBS. And CBS is what brought him to the Masters primarily. Well, actually, he was at the Masters long before CBS, but he did a lot of CBS work with the Masters.
And he was there at the Masters in 1935 when Gene Sarazen hit the shot heard around the world that is famously known. And was introduced to CBS by Red Barber. If people don't know Red Barber, I mean, legendary baseball broadcaster in general. It almost seems like he led a Walter Mitty kind of existence. I mean, the path that he walked, the people he met, where one door opens, another door may close, one door opens, people you meet, just the walk of life that he had seemed to be a charmed one.
It totally was. And he came along in an era when you could have that walk. This day and time, that's just about impossible with people being protected behind security and one thing and another. But yes, he did. And it's interesting talking about the Gene Sarazen shot. He said, Dad has always said over his career, he has run into thousands of people who said that they witnessed the Gene Sarazen account. And he said there was literally like 6 people there.
Right.
And which he said, I was not one.
Yeah.
He said, I was on the grounds, but I was not at that particular hole. So anyway, he always kind of laughed about the irony of that. But yeah, you're exactly right. It seemed like he was always in the right place at the right time. One of the interesting stories he writes about, and he's written 3 books. And the reason why he wrote these books is because after my mom passed away, we had a summer home in the state of Maine, the western Maine. And my parents would always go up there all summer long. And after Mom passed away, Dad still continued to go up there, and I would drive him up there. So it was 1,000 miles in a car with my dad. And he talked and talked and talked constantly, and he told all these stories. And I said, Dad, I'm not going to drive you another mile if you don't write these down, because I'll forget them.
Yeah.
So one of the interesting stories he talks about, talking about meeting people at the right time, he was walking on a golf course in New Jersey where he was getting ready to do a broadcast the next day. The gentleman who was walking with him said, oh, look, 2 fairways over, there goes Albert Einstein. He's out here walking just to get his exercise. Would you like to meet Einstein? And Dad said, sure. He said, who doesn't want to meet Albert Einstein?
Right.
So they cut across a couple of fairways, and this gentleman who he was with knew Dr. Einstein. And so he said, hey, this, I want to meet you. I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. He's going to be doing the golf tournament here this weekend. So Dad meets him, and I can't mimic Dad's, he tried to replicate Einstein's accent, but at any rate, the gist of the discussion was, he said to Einstein, he said, Mr. Einstein or Dr. Einstein, do you play golf? And evidently Einstein looked at him and shook his head. He said, no, tried it once, too complicated. And so my father always said to me, what in the world am I doing in a sport that's too complicated for Einstein to figure out?
Right. And my original career is in journalism. And so I remember growing up and watching Walter Cronkite. He was a big influence as to why I got into journalism. But he knew Walter Cronkite, Edward R. Murrow, Jim McKay, if you remember from the Wide World of Sports and ABC and the Olympics. He was a stalwart. Every year was the host of the Olympics every year on ABC Sports. And Vin Scully, legendary Dodgers broadcaster who passed away a few years ago. And again, just the people that he had a chance to meet and engage with is fascinating.
If I'm not mistaken, somewhere along the line, one of his stories was I think he helped Vin Scully get his start. Huh. And the '48 Olympics were in London, if I'm not mistaken. And at that point in time, they would take teams from the United States or that particular Olympics, they took the teams from the United States over there by steamer ship. And my father and mother got to ride over on the steamer ship with all the teams that were going in the Olympics. And he had a lot of amazing stories to tell from that, and some different little, knickknacks and things like that. So he was always in the right place at the right time.
And again, and back then, you could engage with them easily. Now it's like they've got their entourage, their agents. Like you can't get near these
Nowhere
people.
Near. No. He bumped heads one morning. I think it was with Herbert Hoover, and I'm wrong on that probably. But I'm trying to think which it was a
Dwight D. Eisenhower.
No, Dwight D. Eisenhower was when he was at Augusta. At any rate, this gentleman had just gone down to get a paper that morning, and they literally bumped heads going to get the same newspaper. And again, this day and time, that could 100% never happen because of the entourage and the security and that kind of stuff. So, and Dad was very good friends with a lot of the sports figures. They flew him back from India. Dad served in World War II in the China-Burma India Theater, and they flew him back from India to do Babe Ruth's obituary, or Babe Ruth's, I guess, his funeral. And they also flew him back to cover the World Series that year. And they said it was one of the longest commutes to cover a World Series that was ever done and stuff. So, and when he was in India, this is kind of an interesting story. When he was in India, he became very good friends with Mahatma Gandhi. There was evidently Gandhi is a common name in India, it's like Smith in the United States. Yeah. And Dad was in charge of the China-Burma India. There was a newspaper that they had there called the CBI Roundup for the military guys, which basically brought a little bit of home back to them. And there was a gentleman in there working in the industry there in the newsroom, and his name was Gandhi. And he kept saying, "Oh, my father wants to meet you. My father wants to meet you." And Dad's like, "Yeah, okay, kid, that's good. We'll get to that one of these days. I'd like to meet him too. That's fine." And someday, about several weeks later, another guy came up and tapped Dad on the shoulder and said, "You do know who his father is, right?" And Dad's like, "Mr. Gandhi, I have no idea. Who's his father?" And they said his father's the Mahatma. And Dad's like, "Oh.
The Gandhi.
The Gandhi." So he became very good friends with him. And Gandhi had some amazing insights that he shared with my father. One of the most poignant ones, I think, especially for this day and time, Dad would say to Gandhi, he had to take his shoes off before he went in and that kind of stuff. And Dad would say to Mr. Gandhi, he said, "Mr. Gandhi, you have so many people dying in your streets here in Calcutta. There's bodies. There's people that just die in your street. They're starving. Why don't you help them? Why doesn't your government help them?" And this was a true drop the mic moment. So Gandhi looked at him and said, "The reason why I don't help this, or the reason why the government doesn't help, If the government helps people like that, you raise a nation of beggars. And that was his thought process on that.
Food for thought.
Food for thought. So at any rate, but Dad came home with a whole lot of different insights and one thing and another. But there again, right place, right time.
Yeah. Talk about a great place. He was sat at the 15th hole tower at Augusta National for decades. Was, a fixture there for a long time. Talk about his love for what is arguably the greatest golf tournament on the planet. Every year in April in Augusta National.
He absolutely worshipped Augusta National. He went down there, like I said, he was there for I guess the second one or something like that. I mean, like 35, and I'm not 100% sure when it started. And went almost every single year after that and covered several of them, like you pointed out, 62 of them. He just found it was a revered piece of earth, and he was very good friends with the different people that helped to cultivate that golf course, and and he was good friends, of course, with Bobby Jones. Exactly. And, he just absolutely loved that place, and it loved him. And he covered it for 62 years, initially in media, in print, and then eventually in radio, and then eventually in television. And then the last several years that he covered it, he actually covered it in basically a mix of the media type thing. They had a telephone number, 800 number, that radio stations from all over the United States could call in, and they would get Dad's voice recorded on there for an update on the Masters. And it was called like the Masters Progress Notes or Progress Report or whatever. So, and he did that for the last probably 10 years that he was still actually in media. Goodness, probably well into his 70s or even early 80s. And he would just, like I said, he was always known as the voice of Augusta. So that's why they had him do these Masters Progress Reports. Now in today's cute computer, it's not the same.
Not the same at all. And was he a contemporary? I know Kevin Drum, who I'm sure you know very well. I'm sure you have plenty of stories about his father, Bob Drum. Did he know him, or were they contemporaries? Did. Okay.
Certainly, yeah. They knew each other once they got to Pinehurst, and perhaps even before.
Yeah.
He was younger than Dad. Dad would have been 98 when he passed away in 2015. That was his 98th year. So I believe that he was younger than Dad. Oh, absolutely knew each other.
Yeah. And you lived in New Jersey. You moved here in '72. Your dad was the executive director of the World Golf Hall of Fame.
Correct.
Talk about your experience there. I mean, if people don't remember, they know where the current one is there at Golf House Pinehurst there as you enter the country club through the circle there between the Carolina Hotel and the country club. But the old one used to be as you're going down the long stretch of grass highway toward the circle.
Right.
It's off there to the right before you get to the circle.
It's actually, now it's entrance to number 7.
Number 7.
Course number 7, exactly. Yeah, and that was where the initial thing was. And he was basically headhunted in New Jersey by Diamond Head Corporation, who were the ones that basically spearheaded that. And they were based out of Mountainside, New Jersey. So they specifically reached out to him to ask if he would come down and be the first director, only because of his extensive contacts. And he was able to get so many different pieces of artifacts and one thing and another. I mean, he had Eisenhower's golf cart in there, for instance, and he had just so many different things because he knew so many of the different guys very well from that era, from the Nicholas Palmer era and even before. So he was able to call him up and say, hey, you got a golf bag, you got some gloves, you got some shoes. What do you got that you could give to the Hall of Fame?
Yeah.
So that was Dad's real benefit there. And he was also very instrumental in getting President Ford to speak there. And that also happened at Augusta. And basically how that happened was he knew he wanted to have Ford come speak at the induction. Ford was a big, huge golf fan. So he's down at Augusta, and you're familiar with Augusta, obviously. They have the putting green roped off. You can't, a lay person can't walk in there. So anyway, President Ford was in there hitting putts, and Billy Graham was there. Now, Billy Graham, of course, the revered religious individual who was also from the Charlotte area, and Dad knew Billy Graham very well. So he saw Billy in there in the circle with Ford and all these other guys, and he motioned to him, and at any rate, no, I know what it was. Excuse me, I'm wrong on that. He actually saw him in the bathroom. Okay. And ran into him in the bathroom. Okay. At any rate, he said, Billy, I've got a request. I really want President Ford to come down here and help with our induction. Clearly, I can't walk up to him in this situation without getting taken away in handcuffs. He said, I'm going to write you a note. Can you please pass this note to President Ford and see what happens?
Wow.
So he said, okay.
How
so
cool
Dad,
is that?
yeah, Dad wrote him a note, basically a request. Hey, would you like to come and help with our induction, help with the opening, the celebration of the World Golf Hall of Fame? He gave it to Billy Graham. Billy Graham said, I got it. So Billy Graham goes back under the rope, walks over to President Ford, and Dad's standing on the outside of the rope watching. He's wanting to see what's going on. He hands the message to President Ford. You can see President Ford sits there and reads it. And he kind of looks around the crowd to see where it was, and he sees Dad, and he points to him, and he goes,
"Hey."
He goes, "Yeah."
That's great.
And so that was how that happened.
Huh. That's amazing. And he headed up the World Golf Hall of Fame until it went. Did he go to Florida?
He did not. He only stayed with it a few years, and there was some dissension there among the ranks for some reason. By that time, I was out of my teens, and I was already starting in my career as a paramedic in Greensboro in my education and stuff. So I wasn't really involved in that. But Dad left in '77. Dad left the Golf Hall of Fame, and then it shortly thereafter went down to Florida. Yeah. But he left in '77 and went down to run. He was the second director for the PGA, the Carolinas section of the PGA director, which directed North Carolina and South Carolina. It was based in Myrtle Beach. It's now based in Greensboro.
Yeah.
But he was only the second director for that, and he was there for that was his last.
And he headed up the Carolinas Golf Association as well, correct?
I'm not so sure about that. That was a possibility. Again, that was during my Greensboro time, so I wasn't down here. I know he was very influential with like Bill Nance and a lot of the other folks that were affiliated with that. But the big thing was the Carolinas PGA. And even after he handed over the reins to some younger folks to be a director, he still remained on as what they call special counsel, which was great. I mean, he was still involved in their meetings and stuff like that. And he was very, very good at arbitration situations and stuff. And so he stayed with his finger in that for a long time.
Carolinas Golf Hall of Fame inductee in 1986, as
Right.
well as the North Carolina Sports Hall of Fame, 1991. You moved here in 72. What was it like? Pinehurst, that's what, 50 some odd years ago. What was it like?
I was in diapers. Yeah, no, I really wasn't.
What was it like growing up in Pinehurst back then?
It was boring. I would be honest with you. Pinehurst in that era, really the median age in Pinehurst in that particular decade and the decades prior to that was probably, honest to goodness, 70, 75. There were not many young people in Pinehurst at that time. There's been a clear, huge influx secondary to the military and just younger people coming down here one thing or another.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more kids here now. There was very few kids per se in the city limits. But however, of course, I went to Pinecrest High School and I was very, very active in the horse community down here, because that's basically what my jam is. And again, as I've told you before, my credit to both my parents, they didn't force me into golf. When you have two parents that are so heavily involved in one sport, very often the child gets involved in that sport whether they want to or not.
Right.
I mean, in the horse world, I've seen the child of two trainers literally get like Velcroed on a pony when they're about 18 months old, whether they want to be or not.
Yeah.
But no, my parents, they let me kind of choose my own way, and my way was horses. And then when I came into when I really got interested in golf, I got interested in it and took it up and became fairly decent at it. But it was just, they let me do it at my own time. But Pinehurst was just very laid back, very slow. In fact, my mother, who of course was a native New Jerseyan, again, I've already set the record straight on my father, that he was actually a Southerner. But Mom was she never quite slowed down enough for Pinehurst in those days. Pinehurst is a little faster now than it used to be, but back then it was pretty low key.
I think in getting ready for this podcast, talking to you about your love of the equestrian, and I think people, they obviously see us as a home of American golf, but I think what they don't understand is like equestrian predates golf in this destination. Talk about your affinity, your love for equestrian and the culture that is still present here that I think, we work closely with, the Weymouth Center and the Blessing of the Hounds and all the things that they do to help emphasize that culture. But talk about how important that is still to a lot of people in this area.
It's huge. It's huge. We are blessed in this area. One of the attributes, one of the geographical attributes of this area that was one of the things that first made Mr. Tufts stop his train halfway between Boston and Florida to even discover Pinehurst is our sandy soil. And the benefit of a sandy soil is after a hard rainstorm, we can still be out working horses or playing golf within a matter of minutes. Mm-hmm. This is atypical from most of your footing, even like in Georgia, the clay, or even just a few 50, not like maybe 30, 40, 50 miles north of us or whatever. We're just in the sandhills of North Carolina. So the footing was the first thing that really brought a lot of different recreational things here, the horses and the golf. But the horses are huge here. The other thing we are so fortunate to have in this area that is really unique to the entire country is the Moss Foundation, which is 3,500 plus acres. And I know that that number is way too low now because amazing benefactors continue to buy forest land and donate it to the hunt. So it's probably much, much more than that now. And there's the original 3,500 acres, which is basically bordered by US 1 and Young's Road. And then we have what they call the New Country, which is north of it a little bit. But at any rate, it is set aside for nothing but horses and hounds. And that's it. And you can drive horses on it, but it has no motorized vehicles, no bicyclists. Hikers are discouraged. They really want to have just for horses and foxhounds and fox hunting, unlike any place in the United States. And it's for free.
Yeah.
Tryon has a big trail system up there as well, but it's for a fee, whereas the Moss Foundation is just open. So that draws a lot of folks here. Very wealthy folks have been here. The Firestone family has been here for many years. They've passed away now, but they had a big farm here. And back in the day, in the 70s and the 80s, there was a lot of affluent families that came down here, and they had large, big tracts of land. As, of course, sadly enough, and this happens, as they start to pass away, their children inherit the land and may not necessarily have the same affinity for the horse sports they do, so they divide it up and sell it. But back in the day, in the 70s, this was just known as such a mecca for the horses. We would have horse shows every other weekend in January and February and March called the Mid-South Series. Again, very nominal fees to go in them. They were what we call schooling shows, meaning that they weren't really for any points or any national acclaim. You were just working with your horse and training them. The rumor was on the East Coast, if you did well that winter in those schooling shows, you were going to clean up in the big show circuits on the East Coast. So again, that was huge. We have several Olympians that are here right now.
Yeah.
Mike Plum, 8-time Olympian. Bobby Costello rode in the Olympics. We have several different Olympians that, you just be out riding down the trails and you're like, oh, hey.
They train here.
Yeah, they train here and they're just extremely approachable and super nice. And it's a real mecca for the horse people. And it's when my parents told me in 1972, hey, we're moving to Pinehurst, Southern Pines area. And again, I think I mentioned to you, we lived on 0.20 acres in Upper Montclair. That's less than a quarter of an acre. For you folks that went to Pinecrest, I'll help you out. Anyway, and in the backyard, I had a horse, a pony, and a goat. And I literally rode the horse in the city streets. The pony, I trained how to pull a carriage. I picked him up for $8 at an auction when I was 12 years old. Anyway, all different stories. But my point being, my parents told me we were coming there, and they said, now, we know how difficult this is to move between your sophomore and junior year. Forget that mess. I was in the car honking the horn. I'm like, are we gone yet? So, yeah, it was amazing to move down here. It's fabulous.
You told me before this podcast, too, that you used to ride what was the Pitt Golf Course, which is now the Pinehurst Sand Mines. You used to be able to ride a trail from pretty much the resort down toward Aberdeen.
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, I moved here in the 70s, but even prior to the 70s, the Pinehurst Resort had a livery component to the basic things that they could offer to their patrons. And it's like I mentioned to you, when Dad and the boys were out playing golf, Mom and the girls might go trail riding. And they had several horses that were livery horses that could be rented by the hour, by the 2 hour. You'd go out on a guided trail ride. And yes, we would leave from the barns, which at that point in time were backed by the Mile racetrack in Pinehurst, and you could ride literally almost to the city limits of Aberdeen. I mean, you could just go way, way, way down. Well, actually, nowadays the city limits may be up fairly close, but I mean, you could ride almost down to the town of Aberdeen, I should say. And the sand mines, which was previously called the pit, was literally that. It was sand pits. You had 30, 40-foot high sand dunes that you could ride down. And interestingly enough, just shortly prior to that time, and a lot of folks may not know this, in the village of Pinehurst, right across from where the brewery is, there's a flat piece of property right now that has some infrastructure. It has some roads and but nothing else there. When I first came here, my very first visit here in 1969, that was where the Pinehurst riding stable was. And that piece of property right there, that road is called Laundry Hill by the natives. Laundry Hill, because at the bottom of that, in what's now a brick building that I think is a business of some kind, was a laundry. Yep. So that that stretch of street has always been called Laundry Hill. So
I think Steve Say owns that piece of property, as a matter of fact.
Okay, and it could be. And so where that piece of property is now was when I first met it in 1969, was the original, and I won't say it was the original, was the Pinehurst livery. And what you would do is they would go lots of times, on the weekend, there would be horse shows behind the Carolina Hotel. The area that's now the pool was actually riding rinks, and they had gymkhanas there and stuff like that. And you would ride through Rassy Wicker Park, through the trails, through the rest of Wicker Park, right over to the Carolina and
Wish
compete.
we could do that now. There's
me
no place
too.
we can go because of the liability insurance. In fact, when I first took the job in 2018, we had a video that showed somebody riding a horse. I'm like, where can you do that?
Can't do
and
that
it's
anymore.
like, you can't do that. Well, we can't put that in the video because people have the perception they can do that. We would love to see that happen. And we've talked to Weymouth about doing some horse-related type programming that maybe couples or girlfriend getaways can enjoy when they come and visit the Pinehurst area, or Southern Pines too. So more to come on that. But
more to come on that. No, it's great. But that was a big part of Pinehurst. The horses were a big part, and a lot of folks that are here for the golf only don't realize that.
Yeah.
But we're very blessed, and horse people definitely need to come here. I think that it's going to be a time where, like I said, Weymouth has had some new management come in there in the horse area. Some good friends of mine are starting to do that. They're doing a lot of work with some of the underserved communities in Moore County and helping with that and introducing kids to horses who would clearly never get to see them otherwise.
Yes.
So, I mean, hey, and they've got some great woods to ride through there. So let's hope that might happen.
In fact, they do the Blessing of the Hounds. I mean, some people may have heard of that. I'm sure you've been to that many times. Describe to people, and it is on Thanksgiving Day. So you do want to but you can tailgate and you can have mimosas and Bloody Marys. And
Yeah,
so
you can
have a good time. But talk about that event, how it's truly special that is to be able to witness that in this culture today.
You can certainly get knee walking drunk if you so decide.
Right.
But
and people do.
And yes, and they do. Okay, Blessing of the Hounds. And I had the pleasure of being on the Moore County Hounds. I rode with the Moore County Hounds for many years, got my junior colors and stuff. The whole idea of the Blessing of the Hounds, it happens at the very first meet of the year, which is always in this area, it's always Thanksgiving Day. And it is, what they do is the hounds come. There's when I first started singing the Blessing of the Hounds, there was a couple of hundred people there. Now there's thousands.
Yes.
It is a huge deal. And that's wonderful because that brings people to see a real part of tradition in this area and one thing and another. So what happens is the MC is usually a gentleman by the name of Peter Doubleday, who is fabulous. Peter is extremely well versed in the history of the Moore County Hounds. He is one of the most respected horse show announcers in the United States. He does a fabulous job, and he basically MCs through the whole thing so he can tell the crowd what we're looking for, describing what the horses look like, why the riders are wearing a certain colored jacket, that we never call the hounds dogs. Please don't do that, people. Don't call them dogs.
It's like masters, you don't call them fans because that's fanatics. They're supposed to be patrons.
They're patrons, yes.
Yeah.
The master's patrons,
Right.
yes, that's right. And the canines that fox hunt are referred to as hounds, not as dogs. So anyway, but it's a fabulous experience, great for the whole family, and you get to watch the horses. The horses and hounds basically parade around for just a few minutes, and then they go off on something that's called a drag hunt. And it's the only drag hunt of the year that the Moore County Hounds have, and what that means is a bag with a scent has been dragged, what a proper word, drug, I guess, over a pre-described course. So they know exactly how long they're going to be out. They know exactly where they're going. And then they come back into the field about an hour later to again now welcome the folks who probably are knee walking drunk by now, who've been waiting on them, to welcome the family. And everybody comes back hopefully on the same side of the horse they left on. And
Right.
and it's much fun for everybody. But because normally fox hunts go out, the hounds go catch a scent, and then you have no idea where you end up or whatever. It's totally unscripted. But for that particular day, they know it.
I'm glad you defined drag hunt because that could probably, in this day and age, could probably have different meaning, but we won't go there.
We won't go there. Yes, this is definitely a different meaning. Yes.
Let's talk about golf. Obviously, you're a huge equestrian, but golf is a big part. You were talking before the taping that you play some golf with Donna Andrews.
Quite a bit of golf and with Donna, and it was just amazing. We hit it off wonderful. We would golf in the morning and we would ride in the afternoon because Donna also was an avid equestrian, had a lovely farm on Youngs Road. So we just would spend the whole day together golfing in the morning. She'd help me with my golf. I'd help her with her horses. It was a perfect deal.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was great, and it was a lot of fun. And again, I came into the sport in my 30s. I mean, literally, it was pretty late. I mean, sure, I hit some balls, and like you said, I told you before, I had my picture on the cover of Golf World magazine with Uncle Sam, who was Sam Snead to me. Who's Sam Snead to everyone else. He was Uncle Sam to me, trying to help me with my swing when I was about 4. And unfortunately, he wasn't successful. But at any rate, it was great to play with golf with Donna, and what an awesome experience. She's a fabulous athlete.
Like to ask this of people on the show too, from a tourism standpoint. If somebody were to never come to Pinehurst, and you said you need to come do this, how would you phrase that or frame that for them?
And that's a great question, depending obviously on what their interests are. I mean, clearly, if they have any equestrian interest at all, then trying to come either like time it to see the Blessing of the Hounds. The other thing is at the harness track, there are horse shows all winter long. Every 2 weeks, we have different schooling shows. So there's horse shows, and they go in the daytime, usually in the morning, obviously in the day. And then in the summertime, there's shows there as well that run from 7 a.m. until noon to avoid the heat. So there's a lot for the equestrian. Clearly for the golf, oh my word, take a pick. The Golf Hall of Fame, walk number 2, play the Cradle, enjoy some of the other fabulous golf courses we have in this area, Mid-South, Tallamore. It's just a mecca. Just come and just enjoy all the different things that this area has to offer because it's fabulous. And be aware of the fact when you come, you may not want to leave.
Well, it's interesting because we're not responsible for people buying real estate. I tell people our job is to get people from all around the world to come here and spend all their money, then go home, then plan another trip. But then, people hey, do you have a realtor? Who's your realtor? And it's like, no, we don't. We're not selling
don't stay
home.
here.
But
What's interesting you say that because, again, back in the 70s when Diamond Head was here, one of their big pushes was to target the Northeast, primarily New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts.
Still a huge pipeline.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to target these people with the sales ploy of, hey, here's Pinehurst, buy your lot now, and then you retire in 20 or 30 years, whatever that is. So for a long time in the 70s, that was awesome. And so people bought the lots down here. The lots stayed uninhabited. However, they were producing income, taxable income. Yeah. A lot of them had bought memberships at the country clubs. So they were still paying for that. Well, the only caveat to that, the only downside to that is eventually these people do retire. And eventually they do move down here. And so that's when things start getting crowded. But it's amazing. The area has been able to absorb that, and we still grow, and it's been able to absorb the influx of folks, including the military, which God bless them and God bless what they do. Mm-hmm. So there's plenty of room for folks.
Got to ask you this. I mean, everybody has an opinion about this when it comes to Pinehurst, whether you travel here, live here. Everybody has an opinion about the traffic circle in Pinehurst. Talk about what is the solution. I guess DOT is going to have a solution after the 2029 U.S. Open, which should be interesting. But you have a pretty interesting take on that. I
do have an interesting take on it. Obviously, the home that my parents bought in 1972 is a stone's throw away from the traffic circle. I mean, literally. And as I said, one of the highlights of my last 2 years at Pinecrest, my only 2 years at Pinecrest, would be literally getting a crew of us at midnight, and we would drive around the traffic circle backwards.
And people still do.
And that's great.
And in the middle of the day.
Well, that's true. That's true. But they're usually somehow impaired. Right. We were just dumb young kids. Because there was just virtually no traffic at that point in time. And the traffic circle really didn't start getting busy until these people started retiring and moving down here.
Right.
But no, my take on the traffic circle is this. I go in it and out of it every single day and have been for decades. And I may have a wreck in it today. But, you learn how to drive in it. That's the biggest thing. I think people need to slow down a little tiny bit, let more people in, and that will shorten the lines on the access lines coming into it. Take a little bit of a deep breath, take a little bit of patience. Hopefully you didn't come to Pinehurst to stay tense. That's not our vibe here.
No. Yep.
That's not our vibe. This is the vibe to come down and woosah. Take a deep breath. That's what Pinehurst, Southern Pines, this whole area is about. Please don't bring your anxiety from the more atypical high traffic areas, your Atlantas, your LAs, your New York cities. Don't bring that tension down here, because in all honesty, every one of us, and this, every one of us has waited in line much longer than the 5 to 8 to maybe 10 minutes you have to wait in line on 15501 sometimes. I mean, it just is what it is. This is a very, very minor problem in the grand scheme of things. If you really can remember your traffic in Dallas, like I said, Dallas, Atlanta, LA, where you have 12, 15 lanes across. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah, I lived in Atlanta and DC, so
God bless
it's no fun. Driving through that traffic circle, like, oh, there's a 3-minute wait through the traffic circle. You don't know traffic. You don't know.
Yeah, you have no idea. Seriously, it's the truth. And speaking from as a paramedic, which I've been since 1980, like I said, I think sadly enough, I foresee some very serious accidents ahead. I mean, it's going to be years ahead. Clearly, it's not even going to be...
When you see the solution.
When we see the solution, we don't even know. Clearly, that's not even going to be constructed until 2029. And I mean, they'll probably put a silver alert out on me by then, so I don't really have to worry about it. But at the end of the day, it is... My little crystal ball says there'll be some problems with that eventually.
I'm interested to get your perspective on this from what we do as an organization. We're working on a new ad campaign that'll come out in the fall of 2026, centered around the sentiment of home. And what home means to people that come to Pinehurst, or whether they live here or they visit. Because one thing we found that if I go, a lot of times I go to the Cradle on Sunday afternoon and talk to people, hey, where are you from? What brought you here? And almost to a person, they say, this reminds me of home. I feel like I'm home. And even when they opened up Golf House Pinehurst, Michael Wan with the USGA said, this is like coming home. So what is it, having been a resident here since 1972, what is your sense of when people come here and say, this is just like being home?
Well, I can tell you, I can tell you what my take on that is. It's just the welcoming atmosphere. And like I said, I alluded to a few minutes ago, just it's a little bit of a step back from the tension and the hustle and bustle of your large cities. And it's just, if it's not, I know when people say it's kind of like coming home, it's kind of like coming to the home they would want